Thank you very much. How's everybody doing tonight? Good. Great. It's great to see you tonight. I just wanted to see the people crazy enough to get out in this weather tonight, so I feel like I'm in good company this evening. I'm so glad you were able to make it. Crazy weather this evening, and what a beautiful theater. I'm excited to be with you tonight. My goal this evening is to get you, inspire you to look at things in a different perspective, to see things a little bit differently tonight, and I hope that I accomplish that goal. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the businesses I've started, some of the things I've wrote about, but my big goal tonight is to really get you to see things a little bit differently. If you've ever seen the movie Dead Poets Society, in that movie, Robin Williams' character, at one point in the movie, he's a teacher of a all-boys private school. And he stands up on top of his desk in front of the entire class, and he asks the question, why do I stand upon my desk? And of course, the boys, they're intrigued, right? I mean, they don't know what in the world he's doing. A little bit crazy, they're curious about what it is that he's doing. And then he answers the question. He says, I stand upon my desk in order to remind myself to see things differently at all times. Because the moment I think I've got it figured out, I want to see it just a little bit differently. And so that's my goal tonight. I'm going to talk to you about a few concepts from the book. But first I wanted to share a story with you about a man who owned some land in Texas, South Texas, near Beaumont. This is at the turn of the 20th century. And he owned some land, but he wasn't doing very well. He's really struggling to make ends meet. And one day, a guy dressed kind of like me showed up at his doorstep. He was an oil executive. And he said, we think that there might be oil in your ground. We'd like to drill for it. And if you would let us do that and we discover oil, we're willing to pay you a royalty for every barrel that we bring up. So without much to lose, the man agreed. And within a period of time, they struck one of the biggest gushers to ever happen. In fact, in the one day that they struck, it literally destroyed the derrick, and 100,000 barrels of oil flowed out of that well in a 24-hour period before they could get it capped. Absolutely amazing. And so this man went from barely getting by, barely making it, to suddenly he's a multimillionaire 10 times over. Or is he? Because when you think about that story, that oil always existed. In fact, that oil had been there for millions of years. It was there the day he purchased the property. But it wasn't until the oil was discovered, brought to the surface, and then taken to market that it ever became of any value for him. And I like to think that that field and that man's oil is very similar for each one of us tonight. Because there's potential that we have deep down that we haven't even begun to tap, that we don't even understand that exists today. And until we identify that potential, bring it to the surface, and then take it to market, does it become of any value? And so in my goal to get you to see things differently, I'm hoping to get you to see things differently about your own perspective, your own life. Most of the folks in here are very successful people. You've done successful things. And so I want to get you to think just a little bit differently, to see potential that maybe you've never seen in yourself. And so that's my goal tonight. Brad shared that I'm an entrepreneur. I'm currently in the rail business. I love the rail business. I've been in technology and a few other industries. I'll tell you, before I ever started my first company, I didn't know anything about starting or running a company. I didn't know anyone who knew how to start or run a company. And so I spent some time just researching the great entrepreneurs of the last 200 plus years, the American entrepreneurs. And so I started reading everything I could get my hands on. I was just intrigued. I wanted to get inside their heads and understand how they think and how they process information. So I just started reading everything I could get my hands on, and I made two amazing discoveries. The first discovery I made was that it didn't matter what walk of life these people came from. Anybody could become a successful, great entrepreneur. It didn't matter. And so I could show you right now entrepreneurs who were born into very wealthy homes that have gone on to be very successful entrepreneurs. And likewise, I can show you folks that were born into extreme poverty with absolute nothing and yet still became great entrepreneurs. I can show you some who were born into families that could afford great education, and so they went on and were schooled, great levels of education, and I can show you others, like Thomas Edison, who barely had an 8th grade education, who went on to be a very successful entrepreneur. So that intrigued me. I was really excited because I thought, man, even I might be able to pull this off, you know? I might be able to prove all the teachers that I had throughout the years wrong, that I could actually do this. So I got excited. But at the same time, I really became concerned because I thought, where is the common thread for the successful entrepreneur? And so I made my second discovery. And the second discovery was that there were certain patterns of behavior or habits that these successful entrepreneurs had and exhibited over and over and over again. And I started to see them just strung out. You could see it over and over. The ability to focus on the most important. A hard work ethic. The ability to see opportunity that others don't see. Amazing attributes. The ability to cast vision and inspire others and motivate people to that vision. And so, man, I became like really excited when I started to discover these attributes. And so I found a partner and we bought a business and we started applying these attributes and we had some success. But then I started to ask myself, I thought, you know, these attributes, do they have application beyond the business world? Could I apply these in my personal life? And so we started playing with that whole idea. And pretty soon, I started to think, what would be the impact if I could start to see opportunity in my children that their teachers don't even see? And I could encourage and foster those opportunities, that potential, into something. What if I could motivate and inspire people like the great entrepreneurs in my personal life? And so I became intrigued with this whole idea. And so that became the basis for the book, Do Great Things. It's not about starting or building businesses, and I'm not going to talk to you about that tonight. There's plenty of folks in the room who've already done that. But what I'm going to talk to you about is taking those applications, the patterns of behavior that those folks have used, and applying them in your personal life. So I'm going to share one of the attributes with you tonight, my favorite one, which is the ability to see opportunity. I love that attribute. I'm going to kind of lay out a plan for how to do that. And then I'm going to share with you, and this is really weaved throughout the book, but I'm going to share with you the greatest power ever bestowed upon mankind. And I'm going to talk to you about when we're not aware of the potential, how detrimental it can be, and I'm also going to talk about the amazing potential that exists when you understand it. And so I'm sure I have you a little intrigued about that. So I'll save that for a moment and talk just a little bit about the ability to see opportunity that others don't see. So first I'll give you a couple examples. Henry Ford is a great example. I think he's an amazing entrepreneur. Here's a man at the turn of the 20th century was in the automotive industry. There were 250 car manufacturers at the time, and they were all focused on one segment of the population, the very, very wealthy. Why do you think they were focused on that segment? They were the only people who could afford cars, right? It made sense. And so Ford seized this opportunity that 250 other auto manufacturers don't see. He recognizes if there is some way to bring an automobile to market that everyone could afford, everything changes. And so eventually he starts his own company, and by 1928, one of every two vehicles ever made in the world is a Ford by 1928. He saw amazing opportunity, and he was able to take advantage of it. The next example I'll give you is Ray Kroc. How many people have heard of Ray Kroc? We got a few. Very impressive. McDonald's. You know, Ray Kroc, before he got into McDonald's, he was a milkshake salesman. He sold milkshake machines. That's what he did. And he met the McDonald brothers. The McDonald brothers had about 8 McDonald's, and they were doing real well. They had a line of people out the door. Things were good. But Ray Kroc saw an opportunity that they didn't even see. He saw the population changing in the 1950s, the baby boomer generation. He saw the interstate system, and he recognized that, man, there's a potential here for people who want fast food. There's a potential to grow this thing with franchising. And even the McDonald brothers did not recognize this opportunity. You know, they sold the entire business for about $2 million to Ray Kroc. Today, McDonald's is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. And the McDonald's family has really not participated in that wealth generation because Ray Kroc was the one who saw the opportunity that others did not see. Now, I could give you 10,000 more examples, one after another after another. But now I'm going to kind of lay out a pattern for how we can see those same opportunities. Some of you tonight, you know how to do this. You do it day in and day out, but you don't even know how you do it. I've talked to many entrepreneurs and I ask them, how do you do what you do? And I've had them say, I don't even know. I just do it. I can't even explain it to you. So I've tried to spend some time extracting those ideas out so that I can share them and put them in a format that you can use and take and apply in your personal life. So I'm going to start first. I'm going to give you 3 keys to do this. The first is ask the right questions. Ask the right questions. You probably don't even realize this, but the way our brains work, the way we analyze information, is through the use of questions. Right now, you're doing this. Right now, I guarantee you, you're asking yourself, does this guy know what he's talking about? You're asking yourself, what are they going to have up for dessert after this? I'm just curious. You're asking yourself, you know, is this worth my time now that I'm here? You're analyzing the entire situation through the use of questions. Several years ago, I lived in Springfield, Illinois. I was in a company car heading on 55 northbound, minding my own business, had the stereo cranked up, driving to a meeting. I'm cruising along in my car about 70 miles an hour, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I get hit from the left. I don't even see who hits me, but I just feel it. And in a second, I turn, and right here on the driver's side window is the grill of a Mack truck. Now, that's not anything you want to see at 70 miles an hour, right there. The second I saw that grill, everything turned into a blur. I did 2 full 360s across 4 lanes of traffic, into the median, into the grass. And at that very moment, as everything's spinning out of control, my elbow drops down and hits the seatbelt and releases the seatbelt. I was buckled in, and all of a sudden now I'm not. And I literally feel the seatbelt sliding off of me as I'm spinning out of control. And for any of you who have been in this type of circumstance, you realize that for a second, everything like stops, and you're like in slow motion. And I sense myself spinning around. And what's going through my head the entire time is, they're all going to say, I can't believe he didn't have a seatbelt on. I just can't believe. I wanted to like take a note and say, I was wearing my seatbelt. I had it on, I swear. But that's what was going through my head. In a second, I hit sand barrels, slammed into these sand barrels, and came to a complete stop. And then what happened? What went through my head was a whole litany of questions. I thought to myself, am I alive? Okay, I'm alive. All right, and is the car okay? Was there other people involved in this accident? Am I still safe? Should I get out of the car? What do I do next? The brain, the way that we think, the way that we're wired is through the use of questions. But the problem is that we don't typically control the questions that we ask. So the brain is kind of free to do whatever it wants to do, right? So it just starts asking questions. And sometimes we ask really ineffective questions of ourselves. This is what I would call self-talk, the things that you sort of say to yourself. And so sometimes we say things like, man, why does that always happen to me? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Why do these things always happen to me? Well, the problem with that question, when you ask that question, you're already making a presupposition that bad things happen to you. And now you just want your brain to go out and answer why that's the case. It's kind of like geometry. For those of you who remember geometry, you remember how you had several givens? This is a given, this is a given, this is a given. Now solve the problem. I don't know if any of you remember that. You got a triangle, you got 2 sides that are equal, 90-degree angle, solve the problem. Well, in the same way, our brain works the same way. And so if we're asking ineffective questions that presuppose certain things, you've just programmed your brain, I want you to solve this problem, but here's all the things that are wrong. And those should not be questioned. You may ask yourself a question like, man, why do I always screw up? Again, you've just presupposed to yourself that you always screw up. And now you want your brain to go find and answer why. And so those ineffective questions are a terrible thing. We don't even recognize that we're doing it. So the great entrepreneurs, what I learned when I was really studying this is that they ask questions that sort of have a wish list built around them. Think about looking for a house, if you've ever done that. You don't just tell your realtor, hey, I need a house with a garage and some bedrooms. You don't just say that. You give a wish list. I need a house with 4 bedrooms. It needs to be in this school district. I need a 2-car garage. It needs to be here. It needs to be within this price range. Now go find a house, right? You've listed all of your givens. Well, in the same way, we need to start asking empowering questions designed in a way to lay out those givens. So I'll give you an example. I don't know about you, but I hate to work out. I absolutely hate it. I don't like being on a treadmill. In fact, I'll be completely honest with you. I would much rather be strapped to a dentist chair with Kenny G music pumped in from behind, having my teeth drilled on, before I'd rather be on a treadmill. I just don't like it. And so at this time, when I was exploring this whole idea, I thought to myself, maybe I ought to think about this particular scenario and apply it in my personal life. So I designed a question to get me motivated to work out. And here's the question I came up with. How could I work out and exercise on a daily basis and love every minute of it? It's a pretty good question. Now, my brain didn't immediately come up with an answer. Your brain is like a superhuman computer. It will go to work, but you got to give it time to work in the subconscious. So I asked myself that question every morning. Didn't come up with an answer for several days. About the 5th or 6th day, it just hit me. In fact, the ideas just started flowing. It was unbelievable. First thing that came to my mind, I'm a soccer coach. I've played soccer my whole life. My boys play soccer. I love to coach. But the way I typically coach is I stand here like this, and I order them around with a whistle. I move very little. I like to stay in one spot. And so I came up with this idea. I thought, I'm there. It's once a week. It's for an hour and a half. What if I put shorts and shoes on, and I ran with those boys? And suddenly, I found that it was a blast. I was enjoying coaching soccer. I would be sweating to death by the time the hour and a half was up. It was a great way. I was killing 2 birds with 1 stone, and I was a better coach. Then another answer came to my mind. My boys are in karate. We have a 10-degree black belt who trains them. This sensei has offered the opportunity for parents to get involved, but no one ever takes him up on it. And I usually sit during karate lessons with my iPhone, and I read email. And I thought, man, what if I got out there and did karate with these boys? And so if you've ever seen the Seinfeld episode when Kramer takes karate with all the 5th graders, if you've ever seen that, that's me. I'm the only dad crazy enough to get out there. But I've been doing that for several years. It's unbelievable exercise. I've learned a new sport. I love every minute of it, and it's quality time with my boys. And again, the answers just kept flowing. Now, that's the way that you create empowering questions. And you ask your brain those questions on a daily basis. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like to challenge you for a minute. I want you to think about one issue that you're dealing with right now. It's either personal, professional, it doesn't matter. One thing that's just keeping you up at night. You're just thinking about it all the time. Maybe you're trying to figure out how to connect with one of your kids. You're struggling to connect with them. I don't know, maybe it's marriage. Maybe you're struggling to really connect with your spouse. Maybe it's at work. You're trying to figure out how to bring in some new customers. Maybe it's financial. Maybe you're thinking about how to ensure that your investments are better protected and still earning a good return. Whatever it is, think about that issue for a moment. And then I'd like to challenge you at the end of this session to think about 3 empowering questions that you could create related to that issue. And then I want you to ask yourself those 3 questions every day for the next week. Just humor me and try it out and see what happens. The last thing that questions do when you start asking them is they change your paradigm. And you shift from this mode of I know everything to a mode of I'm willing to learn. And I'm open for ideas. And I can tell you the I'm willing to learn paradigm is very powerful because now you're in a position where you're open to things you've never considered before. And that's what the great entrepreneurs are doing on a consistent basis. Second key to seeing opportunity that others don't see First is asking the right questions, and second is noticing the trends. In business, we watch trends all the time. I can pull out my iPhone right now and tell you everything about our business. I can tell you where receivables are. I can tell you where sales are. What happens when you start to notice trends is that you start to focus on those areas. But we never notice the trends of the important parts of our life, do we? How many of you track and trend your marriage? Does anybody do that? Could you, over the last 3 years, if you're married, think about how has my marriage been trending over the last 3 years? That's kind of an interesting question, isn't it? Can you imagine being in a boardroom and someone asks you to consider that? Or how about your relationship to your children? You could do this with almost any aspect of your life. I want you to trend and track the important areas of your life and start to notice those trends. The problem is that we see things in a snapshot in time. We focus in on what's right before us instead of looking at what's happening in the trend. And I'll give you a perfect example. If I were running for political office and I told you I'm polling 7 points higher than my nearest competitor and the election is 1 week away, wouldn't you say that's pretty good? That's pretty good. I'm 7 points ahead. But what if 2 weeks ago I was 14 points ahead? And 3 weeks ago I was 30 points ahead? Am I still doing good? I'm trending bad. And you can almost project out and see that this isn't going to end well. But the problem is we look at things in a snapshot in time. So noticing the trends is a really powerful, powerful thing to start doing because it creates focus. Now, if you'll all humor me for a moment, for those of you who don't already have your eyes closed, close your eyes for just a moment. All right, I'm going to give you a second here. Get your eyes closed. Now, I want you to think of everything in this auditorium that's blue. Everything that's blue. Okay, now open your eyes. You missed a lot, didn't you? You're probably dialing in now on all the blue things that you can see. See, we're creatures of deletion. We only hone in on certain things. And now that I've said focus on everything that's blue, it's hard not to focus on everything that's blue. And that's what happens with focus. When you start noticing the trends, you will focus in on the important things. The third component to seeing opportunity that others don't see, 1 is asking the right questions, 2, notice the trends, and 3 is seeing the big picture. Seeing the big picture is key because now you start to see how things start interconnecting to each other because you're asking those questions, you're noticing the trends, and all of a sudden you start to see things emerge that you never noticed before. Perfect example for this, try to watch a football game right down on the 50-yard line, right in the heat of the moment, versus being up a little higher where you start to see how the plays evolve and how they work. Another example, being on vacation or in a town that you've never been in before, and try to figure out where everything is without looking at a map or an aerial. When you start to see that picture from an aerial perspective, everything changes because it all starts to come together. In the early 1800s, Charles Dickens wrote a play, A Christmas Carol. Me and my boys, we watched it here over Christmas. Great movie. It was the Jim Carrey version, which is really good. He puts that extra oomph in it. We really enjoy that movie. And so we're watching A Christmas Carol, and I realized, you know what the ghosts are doing with Scrooge? They're getting him to see the big picture. They're laying it out for him. So he's asking the questions, he's noticing the trends, and now he's starting to see the big picture. And the one who really brings that together is the ghost of Christmas future. Because he puts Scrooge in a position to see what will happen if I stay on the trajectory I'm on. How will things end? And man, does he start to see the big picture. So here's some questions to consider as you start to evaluate those things. How will your health look 5 years down the road if you stay on the same path you're on now? That's an interesting question. One I certainly don't like to consider, especially if I told you what I had for lunch today. Think about where those things are going to go and where they're trending. And you can almost start to see what's happening in the future as you start to see the big picture. And so those are the 3 keys. Asking the right questions, noticing the trends, and then seeing the big picture. If you start to practice those things and put them into practice in your personal life, I guarantee you're going to start to see opportunities you've never seen before. Start to ask, if you've got children or grandchildren, start to ask, what opportunities, what gifts and abilities do my kids have right now that I'm not encouraging? And how do I start encouraging those? Man, I'm telling you, it's a powerful thing to start to consider. And so that's the key to seeing opportunity that others don't see.